In the late 19th century, the world stood on the cusp of a new era. An era where the ways in which people connected and communicated would be forever changed. It was a time of remarkable innovation and discovery, a time when the pace of progress quickened, and new possibilities seemed to unfold with each passing year. In the midst of this period of transformation, one name stands out: Alexander Graham Bell. Born in 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland, Bell's work would go on to shape the course of history in ways few could have imagined. Best known for his invention of the telephone, Bell's contributions to the world of communication have left a lasting legacy that still reverberates in every corner of modern life. Yet his life was not defined by just one invention, but by a deep curiosity, an enduring quest to help others, and an unwavering belief in the power of human connection. As we journey through the life of Alexander Graham Bell, we will explore the quiet turning points, the moments of innovation, and the personal reflections that led to his greatest achievement. Through this story, we will witness the steady unfolding of a legacy that continues to shape the world in which we live today. Before we begin, if you find comfort in this journey, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing where you're listening from. Now, let us settle into the past, and let the story of Alexander Graham Bell begin. Alexander Graham Bell was born on March 3, 1847, in Edinburgh, Scotland, a city rich in intellectual and cultural history. It was here, in the shadow of the Scottish Enlightenment, that Bell's story began. A tale not only of scientific discovery but of family, curiosity, and the desire to connect the world in new ways. Edinburgh in the mid-19th century was a city at the heart of intellectual pursuits. The streets bustled with the energy of great thinkers, poets, and scientists. The city was known for its universities and its thinkers, whose work helped shape the future of many fields, from philosophy to medicine. It was an environment ripe for the nurturing of young minds, and Alexander's early life was filled with the influences of this dynamic, transformative atmosphere. Bell's father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a noted speech and elocution expert. He had developed a system of phonetics, known as visible speech, which was designed to help the deaf communicate more clearly. This system was rooted in the idea that speech sounds could be represented visually, making it easier for the hearing impaired to understand and reproduce spoken language. This work would profoundly shape the young Bell's life, especially given that his mother, Eliza Grace Simons, was deaf. From an early age, Alexander was deeply immersed in the world of sound and communication. His mother's deafness created a unique bond between them, one built on shared experiences, and it shaped the young boy's view of the world. He was often surrounded by the silence of her world, which drew him to explore the nature of sound and how it could be transmitted. Bell's deep empathy for the deaf would remain a constant theme throughout his life and career, a thread that ran through his work and inventions. Despite the challenges of his mother's deafness, Bell's childhood was filled with the love and support of his family. His father, a gifted linguist and teacher, was dedicated to the education of the deaf, and his work in phonetics left a lasting impression on young Alexander. The Bell household was one of ideas and intellectual pursuit, where conversation often revolved around language and communication, and the boundaries of speech were frequently explored. Bell's education began early, and he was exposed to a wide range of subjects. His academic interests were varied, but it was clear from a young age that he had a special affinity for sound and the study of the human voice. Bell showed a natural talent for science, particularly for understanding the mechanics of sound, speech, and hearing. His education was informal at first, as he was taught at home by his father and other private tutors. However, he soon attended the Edinburgh High School, where his academic interests began to grow in more focused directions. Although Bell's formal schooling was relatively short, it provided him with the foundation he needed to pursue his lifelong passion for science and invention. His natural curiosity, combined with his early exposure to the study of sound, led him to experiment with a variety of mechanical devices and methods for improving communication. His fascination with the human voice, coupled with his desire to help the deaf, set the stage for his later work on the telephone. In 1863, Bell's family moved to London, where Alexander continued his education. The move was partly motivated by the desire to further Bell's academic prospects and to offer him opportunities to study in a broader, more diverse environment. Bell enrolled in University College London, where he studied acoustics, the science of sound, and became increasingly focused on how speech could be transmitted and understood, especially by those who could not hear. During this period, Bell became deeply involved in work with the deaf. He began teaching at the Deaf School in London, where his innovative methods helped to revolutionize the way the deaf were taught to communicate. His teaching techniques focused on improving speech and sound articulation, rather than relying solely on sign language, which was the traditional approach. Bell's efforts were groundbreaking, as he believed that every individual, regardless of hearing ability, deserved the opportunity to communicate clearly and effectively. Bell's work with the deaf in London marked a significant turning point in his life. It was during this time that he began to experiment with new ways to transmit sound. His innovative ideas about sound transmission would eventually lead to his work on the telephone. But in these early years, Bell was still primarily focused on improving the lives of the hearing impaired. At the same time, Bell's relationship with his family continued to influence his path. His mother's deafness in particular remained a source of inspiration for his work. He would later recall how, as a child, he would try to find ways to communicate with her more effectively, exploring different methods of sound transmission and speech articulation. These early experiences, in which he sought to bridge the gap between the hearing and deaf worlds, would inform many of his later breakthroughs. Despite his early success, Bell's education was not without its challenges. He faced difficulty in traditional school settings, where he often struggled with the rigid structure of the classroom. However, his innate curiosity and ability to think outside the box allowed him to excel in more practical and hands-on learning environments. His struggles with the formal education system did not deter him. Instead, they strengthened his resolve to pursue a more unconventional path, one that would lead him to become a pioneer in the field of communication. As Bell continued his studies, his work with the deaf grew more focused, and his ideas began to take shape. He developed an increasing interest in the mechanics of sound, particularly how it could be transmitted over distances. He began to experiment with various methods of sound transmission, exploring ways to improve the clarity and range of speech. This work would lay the groundwork for his later inventions, which would forever change the world. By the time Bell reached his early 20s, he was already an accomplished teacher and scientist. But it was his work on sound transmission that would ultimately define his legacy. The foundations of the telephone were taking shape in Bell's mind, as he sought to create a device that would allow sound to be transmitted over long distances. His early experiments with the telegraph and other communication technologies would eventually lead to the invention of the telephone, one of the most transformative inventions in history. In his early years, Bell was driven by a singular passion: to find a way to improve communication. It was a goal shaped by his family's experiences, particularly his mother's deafness, and it was a mission that would take him to places he had never imagined. From his early life in Edinburgh, surrounded by the influence of great thinkers, to his work with the deaf in London, Alexander Graham Bell's path was already set. His curiosity, his empathy, and his unrelenting drive to connect the world through sound would soon lead him to a discovery that would change the course of history forever. In 1870, the Bell family made a life-changing decision. They emigrated from England to Canada. For Alexander Graham Bell, this move was more than just a change of scenery. It marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would see him continue his work with the deaf while also branching out into other scientific endeavours. The journey to Canada was spurred by both personal and professional reasons, but it was in this new environment that Bell would refine his theories and prepare for the innovations that would alter the course of communication forever. The decision to relocate to Canada was influenced by several factors, one of the most significant being Alexander's health. Having suffered from frequent bouts of illness during his years in London, Bell's family sought a healthier climate for him. Canada, with its vast open spaces and fresh air, offered the perfect environment for recovery and further intellectual pursuit. The move also provided Bell with the opportunity to expand his work and explore new possibilities in his field of interest. Upon arriving in Canada, Bell was initially drawn to the vibrant city of Toronto. It was here that he began teaching at the Western School for the Deaf, furthering his commitment to the education of the hearing impaired. His approach to teaching, which emphasized speech and articulation, rather than relying solely on sign language, set him apart from other educators in the field. Bell believed that the deaf should be given the tools to communicate through speech as much as possible, as this would allow them to engage more fully in society. His methods were grounded in his father's work with phonetics, but Bell brought his own unique perspective to the field. He focused on the physical aspects of speech, including the positioning of the tongue and the movement of the vocal cords, believing that mastering these elements would help the deaf communicate more clearly. Bell's time in Canada was marked by a quiet dedication to his teaching. However, it was also during this period that he began to experiment more seriously with sound transmission. His work with the deaf continued to be a central theme in his life, but his scientific curiosity led him to explore other areas, including acoustics and the transmission of sound over distances. Bell had always been fascinated by sound, particularly how the human voice could be carried from one place to another. His experiments with telegraphy, which were already underway in London, took on a new urgency in Canada. Bell believed that if he could find a way to transmit speech electronically, it would revolutionize communication, particularly for the deaf. His interest in sound transmission was not an isolated pursuit. At this time, other inventors were also working on improving the telegraph, and Bell was part of a growing community of scientists who were experimenting with the idea of transmitting voice or music through electrical signals. However, Bell's approach was unique in its emphasis on the human voice. While others focused on improving the telegraph for sending simple messages, Bell wanted to create a machine that could carry the complexity of human speech. It was during his time in Canada that Bell's intellectual and personal interests began to converge. His passion for helping the deaf, combined with his fascination with sound and communication, set the stage for what would become his most significant invention. But it was not just his professional life that was blossoming during this time. Bell was also developing deeper personal connections that would influence the course of his work. In 1871, Bell met a young woman named Mabel Gardner Hubbard, the daughter of a prominent Boston family. Mabel was deaf, having lost her hearing at a young age due to a childhood illness. Their initial meeting took place when Mabel's father, Gardner Hubbard, sought out Bell's expertise to help his daughter improve her speech. Bell and Mabel quickly became close, with Bell being deeply moved by Mabel's determination to communicate despite her hearing loss. Over time, their relationship blossomed into a romantic one, and in 1877 they were married. Mabel's influence on Bell was profound. She was not only his wife, but also his confidant, supporter, and inspiration. Her own experiences as a deaf individual, combined with her passion for education and communication, further fueled Bell's desire to help the deaf community. The early years of Bell's life in Canada were also shaped by his growing professional network. In 1873, Bell was appointed to a position at Boston University, where he began to teach deaf students, continuing the work he'd begun in Canada. This move to the United States marked a pivotal moment in Bell's career. as it gave him access to new resources and opportunities for experimentation. In Boston, Bell continued his work on the transmission of sound, and his efforts began to garner attention from his peers in the scientific community. Bell's work at Boston University brought him into contact with other prominent scientists and inventors, some of whom would later become key figures in the development of the telephone. One of the most significant relationships Bell formed during this period was with Thomas Watson, a young engineer who would go on to play a crucial role in Bell's experiments. Watson, who was initially employed as Bell's assistant, shared his mentor's passion for sound and communication. Together they began to work on the idea of transmitting speech electronically, a project that would ultimately lead to the invention of the telephone. As Bell continued to work on his experiments, his personal life and professional endeavours became increasingly intertwined. Mabel, ever supportive, was a constant presence in his life, offering encouragement and intellectual stimulation. Bell's work with her, as well as with the deaf community, remained a driving force in his life. Yet his growing interest in electrical transmission and acoustics led him down a new path, one that would culminate in the creation of the telephone. Through these years of exploration, experimentation and collaboration, Bell's ideas began to take shape. He was no longer just a teacher working with the deaf. He was becoming a visionary who sought to reshape the way the world communicated. Bell's time in Canada, while marked by quiet dedication to his students and his family, was also a period of intense intellectual growth. His work with the deaf, his personal relationships, and his scientific curiosity all came together during this time, setting the stage for the momentous discovery that would change the world forever. In the early 1870s, while working at Boston University, Alexander Graham Bell's curiosity about sound and speech reached a crucial point. He was no longer merely teaching or exploring the mechanics of sound for the deaf. His focus had turned to a more ambitious goal: the transmission of the human voice over long distances. The moment had arrived when Bell's experiments, theories, and personal experiences would converge into a single, groundbreaking idea: the telephone. At the heart of Bell's interest in sound transmission was his desire to improve communication for the deaf. It was a mission that had driven much of his life's work. Bell believed that if he could develop a device to transmit human speech electrically, it would not only aid the hearing impaired but also revolutionize communication for all people. This was a world-changing idea, but Bell's approach was grounded in a practical and patient pursuit of scientific understanding. Bell's work on the telephone was informed by his previous research on the telegraph. The telegraph, which allowed for the transmission of messages in Morse code, had been a transformative technology. However, Bell was not content with merely transmitting dots and dashes. He believed it was possible to transmit the richness and complexity of the human voice. He was driven by a singular vision: a machine that could carry speech through wires, just as the telegraph carried written messages. In 1874, Bell began to experiment with a new idea: how to turn sound vibrations into electrical signals. He was particularly interested in the vibrations of the human voice. The challenge lay in translating these vibrations into a form that could travel over a wire and then be transformed back into sound at the other end. The concept was simple in theory, but the execution would prove to be far more complex. Bell's initial experiments focused on improving the transmission of sound using an instrument called the harmonic telegraph, which was a device designed to transmit multiple messages simultaneously over the same wire. However, Bell quickly realized that his true goal was not merely to transmit signals, but to reproduce the actual sound of the human voice. This realization marked a turning point in his work. He began experimenting with the idea of using a membrane or diaphragm that could respond to the sound waves of the human voice, turning them into electrical impulses. In 1875, Bell, along with his assistant Thomas Watson, made a breakthrough. Watson, who'd been assisting Bell in his experiments, was the perfect partner for this endeavour. He was an engineer who shared Bell's passion for sound and communication. Together, they worked tirelessly to build a device that could transmit voice. The first significant step in this direction occurred in the spring of 1875, when Bell succeeded in creating a crude, yet functional version of the telephone. The device consisted of a diaphragm which would vibrate in response to sound waves. These vibrations were then converted into electrical signals which travelled through a wire. The first sound transmitted by this primitive telephone was not clear speech, but rather a series of tones and unintelligible noises. Nevertheless, it was a moment of great significance in the development of the telephone. The real breakthrough came in 1876. Bell and Watson had refined their device, and on March 10th, Bell made history with the first clear transmission of speech. In a moment that would become legendary, Bell famously spoke to Watson, saying, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Watson, who was in another room, heard the words through the telephone. This simple sentence, spoken through the vibrations of Bell's voice, marked the first successful transmission of human speech through an electrical device. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. For the first time in history, the human voice had been transmitted electronically. It was a groundbreaking achievement, one that would change the course of history. Bell's telephone, though still in its infancy, held the promise of a new way of communicating, one that would soon spread around the world. In the weeks and months that followed, Bell and Watson continued to refine the telephone. They made improvements to the design, enhancing its clarity and reliability. Bell was not content to rest on his initial success. He knew that his invention had the potential to transform the way people interacted with each other. The goal was to make the telephone a practical tool that could be used by ordinary people, not just scientists and inventors. Bell's work during this time was driven by a deep sense of purpose. His vision of a world where people could communicate over great distances was becoming a reality. But as he would soon discover, the path to making the telephone a commercial success was not without its challenges. Bell was not the only inventor working on the transmission of speech. Others, most notably Elisha Gray, were also developing similar technologies, and this would lead to a bitter legal battle over the patent for the telephone. Despite these challenges, Bell's success with the telephone did not go unnoticed. The moment he transmitted speech to Watson marked the beginning of a new era in communication, one that would ultimately reshape the world. But Bell's journey was only beginning, and the story of the telephone was far from complete. The next few years would be marked by legal disputes, further refinements to the telephone, and the rapid spread of this revolutionary technology. In the meantime, Bell continued to focus on his primary mission, the improvement of communication for the deaf. He recognized the immense potential of the telephone for people like his wife, Mabel, who was deaf. The telephone, with its ability to transmit sound over long distances, could change the way the deaf experienced the world. Bell was determined to make this technology available to those who needed it most. As the telephone began to take shape, Bell's thoughts turned to its commercial possibilities. He knew that for the telephone to truly change the world, it needed to be adopted on a large scale. This would require the development of infrastructure, the building of telephone lines, and the establishment of a network that could connect people across vast distances. These were challenges that would take years to overcome, but Bell was committed to making the telephone a household name. In the years that followed, Bell's telephone would undergo numerous refinements, and its practical applications would begin to emerge. It was clear that the invention had the potential to change the way people lived and worked, but for now, Bell could take a moment to reflect on the success of his early experiments and the historic achievement of transmitting the human voice. In many ways, this was just the beginning of a journey that would take Bell far beyond the walls of his laboratory and into the pages of history. As Alexander Graham Bell's invention of the telephone began to gain attention, it soon became clear that his journey would not be free from obstacles. The immense potential of the telephone drew the interest of many, and it wasn't long before Bell found himself embroiled in one of the most significant patent controversies in the history of technology. At the heart of the dispute was a question that would define Bell's legacy. Who truly deserved credit for the invention of the telephone? The controversy began when Bell filed his patent for the telephone on February 14, 1876, just hours before another inventor, Elisha Gray, submitted a similar patent for a device that could transmit speech electrically. Gray, a prominent electrical engineer, had been working on his own version of a telephone for some time. Both Bell and Gray had arrived at similar conclusions, but the race to secure the patent for the telephone became a matter of timing and legal maneuvering. Bell's patent application was filed with the U.S. Patent Office, and it described a method of transmitting sound through the vibration of a diaphragm, a concept that Bell had been working on for several years. Bell's application, however, was more detailed than Gray's, and it included a description of a device that could transmit speech electronically. The Patent Office, after reviewing both applications, awarded Bell the patent for the telephone on March 7, 1876. The decision to grant Bell the patent was not without controversy. Gray, who'd been working on his own telephone technology, believed that Bell had stolen his idea. Gray had filed a provisional patent for his telephone design just hours after Bell, but it was Bell's more detailed patent that ultimately prevailed. This discrepancy in timing, coupled with Bell's more comprehensive application, led to accusations that Bell had gained an unfair advantage. The legal battle that followed would span several years, with both Bell and Gray claiming the rights to the invention. Gray's supporters argued that Bell's invention was based on ideas that Gray had developed earlier. They pointed to the similarities between the two devices and the fact that both inventors had been working on similar technologies at the same time. Bell, on the other hand, defended his patent by insisting that his work was original and that his invention was the result of years of experimentation and careful thought. The dispute was further complicated by the fact that Bell had the support of a powerful group of investors and business partners, including Gardner Hubbard, the father of Bell's wife, Mabel. Hubbard was a prominent businessman and one of the earliest investors in Bell's telephone project. His influence played a key role in Bell's ability to secure the patent and navigate the legal battles that followed. Bell's financial backing, along with his patent, gave him a significant advantage over Gray, whose resources were more limited. In the years that followed, Bell's legal team fought fiercely to defend the patent. The case went through multiple trials and appeals, and Bell's opponents mounted a concerted effort to prove that Bell's invention was not original. They presented evidence that Gray had conceived of the telephone idea before Bell, and that Bell had copied key elements of Gray's work. Despite these challenges, Bell's legal team managed to secure a series of favourable rulings, culminating in a final decision by the US Supreme Court in 1888, which upheld Bell's patent and confirmed his ownership of the invention. The legal battle over the telephone patent was a costly and contentious affair, and it had far-reaching implications for Bell's future. While Bell's victory in the patent dispute was a significant triumph, the prolonged litigation took a toll on his reputation. Some viewed Bell as a ruthless inventor who had used his influence and resources to secure the patent at the expense of a fellow inventor. Others, however, saw him as a visionary who had pioneered a technology that would transform the world. Bell's success in securing the patent for the telephone allowed him to focus on the commercialization of the device. The telephone, once a theoretical concept, was now a tangible product, and Bell was determined to see it succeed. However, the legal controversy had left a cloud over Bell's achievement. The question of who truly deserved credit for the invention of the telephone would continue to linger, and it would be a source of tension between Bell and his critics for many years to come. Despite the legal challenges, Bell's telephone quickly gained traction. In the years following the patent dispute, Bell worked tirelessly to promote his invention and bring it to the masses. He sought to establish a network of telephone lines that would allow people to communicate over long distances. Bell's company, the Bell Telephone Company, was founded in 1877, and it began to build the infrastructure needed to support the widespread use of the telephone. The telephone revolutionized communication, and Bell's vision of a world connected by sound became a reality. The device allowed people to communicate across great distances, transcending the limitations of traditional methods like letter writing and the telegraph. The impact of the telephone on society was profound, and it marked the beginning of a new era in communication. In the midst of this transformation, Bell's legal battles continue to cast a shadow over his legacy. While he had secured the patent and achieved widespread success with the telephone, the questions surrounding the patent dispute would remain a part of his story. Despite this, Bell's invention would continue to change the world, and his place in history as the inventor of the telephone was solidified. As Bell's telephone network grew, so did his influence. The telephone became a staple of modern life, and Bell's contributions to the field of communication were recognized around the world. But the controversy surrounding his patent would always be a part of his legacy, a reminder of the fierce competition and legal battles that defined the early days of technological innovation. After the legal battles surrounding the patent were resolved, Alexander Graham Bell found himself in a unique position. His invention, the telephone, had emerged victorious in the courts, but the true test lay ahead. Could the telephone, still a relatively new and unproven device, take root in society and become a part of everyday life? The answer came swiftly and decisively. As soon as the telephone was introduced to the public, it captured imaginations and sparked widespread interest. The concept of voice transmission over long distances seemed almost magical, and the potential applications were immediately clear. The world of communication was about to undergo a transformation. In 1877, Bell founded the Bell Telephone Company, which would go on to play a central role in the telephone's development and expansion. The company was established with the goal of building the infrastructure necessary to connect people through telephone lines. Bell and his partners faced the daunting task of laying thousands of miles of wires, constructing telephone exchanges, and ensuring that the technology was reliable enough for daily use. Bell's early telephone was a simple device by today's standards. Its transmission was far from perfect, and it required significant effort to establish a reliable connection. Nevertheless, it held immense potential. The telephone was not just an innovation in communication. It represented the promise of a future where the world would be more interconnected than ever before. The initial adoption of the telephone was slow. In the early years, only a small number of businesses and wealthy individuals had access to the technology. In large cities, telephones began to appear in the offices of prominent businessmen, doctors, and government officials. The first telephone exchange was set up in New Haven, Connecticut in 1878, and it allowed for the connection of a small network of phones. While the technology was still in its infancy, the potential for growth was undeniable. The Bell Telephone Company quickly expanded its reach, and by the early 1880s, telephone networks were being built in major cities across the United States and in other countries. In 1883, the first long-distance telephone line was completed, connecting the cities of Boston and New York. This marked a significant milestone in the development of the telephone, as it demonstrated that voice communication could span large distances. The successful transmission of a telephone call over such a long distance captured the public's imagination and confirmed that the telephone was not just a novelty, but a revolutionary tool. Bell's invention was beginning to change the way people interacted with each other. The telephone allowed for instantaneous communication, a stark contrast to the slower methods of communication that had existed previously. Letters and telegrams, which could take days to reach their destination, were now being replaced by a device that allowed people to speak directly to one another, regardless of distance. As the telephone network grew, so did the opportunities for businesses to use it. The telephone quickly became a tool for commerce, enabling companies to communicate more efficiently with customers, suppliers, and other businesses. In the early days, the telephone was primarily used for personal communication or for business-related matters, but over time its role expanded. It was no longer just a luxury for the rich or an experimental gadget for inventors. It had become a fundamental part of modern life. The growth of the telephone also brought with it new challenges. The telephone lines, initially strung between telephone poles, were susceptible to weather conditions, accidents, and wear and tear. To address these issues, telephone companies had to invest in the development of more durable infrastructure. Engineers and inventors began to develop new materials for wires, and methods were devised for protecting the lines from damage. As these advancements were made, the telephone became more reliable and accessible to a wider audience. The proliferation of telephones also led to the rise of telephone operators. Initially, operators manually connected calls by plugging wires into switchboards, a labor-intensive process. As the demand for telephone service grew, so did the need for operators. The jobs of these operators became central to the functioning of the telephone network, and it was not long before entire industries emerged around the operation and maintenance of telephone systems. By the 1890s, the telephone had become a ubiquitous part of American life. Small towns and rural areas, which had initially been left out of the early telephone networks, began to be connected to the growing national system. In 1894, the first transcontinental telephone line was completed, linking the East Coast to the West Coast. The United States was now connected by an intricate web of telephone lines, and communication across the country had become as simple as picking up a receiver. The rise of the telephone was not just a triumph of technology, it was also a testament to the vision of Alexander Graham Bell. Although Bell was not directly involved in the day-to-day operations of the Bell Telephone Company after its founding, he remained deeply committed to ensuring that his invention reached its full potential. Bell's vision had always been one of connection, a belief that the telephone could bring people closer together, fostering understanding and collaboration across vast distances. As the telephone spread across the country and around the world, it became clear that Bell's vision was being realized. Bell's influence on the development of the telephone did not end with the creation of the device itself. In the years following the telephone's introduction, Bell continued to work on other inventions and scientific endeavors. He was an avid inventor, constantly seeking to push the boundaries of what was possible. Some of his other inventions included work in aviation and hydrofoils, and he made important contributions to the field of optical telecommunications. But despite his other pursuits, Bell's most enduring legacy would remain the telephone. The telephone network continued to grow and evolve throughout the early 20th century. By the turn of the century, the telephone had become a standard household item, and the world had been irrevocably changed. The telephone was no longer a luxury or a novelty. It had become a necessary tool for communication, and it had paved the way for the development of the modern world. Bell's telephone had not only transformed the way people communicated, but it had also laid the foundation for the creation of new industries and technologies. As the telephone continued to evolve, it would lead to the development of new communication methods, such as the mobile phone, the internet, and video conferencing, all of which were unimaginable in Bell's time but were made possible by the principles he had established with his invention. As the telephone network spread across the United States and around the world, Alexander Graham Bell's influence grew, but so too did his desire for new challenges. While the telephone continued to evolve, Bell's mind never rested, and he soon turned his attention to other scientific pursuits. By the late 1880s, Bell had moved west, seeking a quieter, more reflective life in the small village of Baddeck, Nova Scotia. It was here that Bell would pursue a variety of new ventures, including work in aeronautics, hydrofoils, and other fields far removed from the telephone. The decision to move to Baddeck in 1885 was partly driven by personal reasons. Bell's wife, Mabel, had always been a source of support for him, and the couple sought a peaceful place to settle. Baddeck, a picturesque village on the shores of the Brador Lake, offered the tranquility Bell needed to focus on his scientific interests. The move also marked a significant change in Bell's life. He no longer needed to devote himself to the telephone's commercialization, and he could now turn his attention to his many other interests. Bell's new home, called Bain Bria, meaning beautiful mountain in Gaelic, became a sanctuary for him. It was here that he could reflect on his past achievements and think about the future. Despite the demands of managing the telephone empire that he had helped create, Bell found peace in his quiet surroundings, where he could experiment with new ideas at his leisure. One of Bell's first major ventures in Baddeck was in the field of aviation. Bell had long been fascinated by the possibilities of flight, and his work in this area would bring us into contact with some of the leading minds of his time. In the late 1890s, he began to experiment with aerodynamics, studying the principles of flight and attempting to design machines that could carry humans into the air. His interest in aviation was not just theoretical. Bell was a hands-on inventor, and he sought to build working prototypes. In 1891, Bell and his team of researchers created the first successful heavier-than-air flying machine, known as the aerodrome. Although it was not capable of carrying a human being, the aerodrome represented a significant milestone in the development of aviation technology. Bell's work laid the groundwork for future advances in flight, and while he did not achieve the same level of fame for his work in aviation as for the telephone, his contributions were nonetheless important. At the same time, Bell's curiosity led him into the world of hydrofoils, a type of boat designed to travel at high speeds above the water's surface. Bell's hydrofoil experiments were inspired by his interest in reducing the friction between boats and water, which would allow for faster travel. In 1898, Bell and his team successfully built a working hydrofoil known as the HD-4, which reached speeds of over 70 miles per hour, setting a world record. This achievement marked another triumph in Bell's long career of scientific exploration. Bell's work in these fields was not just motivated by personal curiosity, it also reflected his desire to improve the world around him. Whether in aviation, hydrofoils, or other scientific endeavors, Bell's goal was to create practical solutions to everyday problems. His innovations were grounded in a belief that technology should serve humanity, a principle that had guided him throughout his career. While Bell's work in Baddeck was focused on these new ventures, his thoughts often turned to the telephone and its legacy. By this time, the telephone was firmly entrenched in the fabric of modern life. The Bell Telephone Company, which had been established in the late 1870s, was now a global corporation. Bell's invention had revolutionized communication, and its impact was felt in virtually every corner of the world. Despite his success, Bell remained humble about his role in the telephone's development. He often remarked that he was simply fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, and that his success was the result of the work of many people, not just his own efforts. Nevertheless, Bell was deeply proud of the telephone's impact on society. The invention had allowed people to communicate across vast distances, breaking down barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. It was an achievement that Bell believed would continue to shape the future for generations to come. Bell's later years were marked by a sense of reflection. He had achieved more than most people could have dreamed of, yet he continued to search for new ways to contribute to the world. His work in aviation and hydrofoils, though not as widely known as his work on the telephone, was a testament to his unyielding curiosity and his drive to push the boundaries of science and technology. Bell's influence also extended beyond his own inventions. He was deeply involved in the scientific community, and his contributions to various fields helped lay the foundation for future discoveries. In his later years, Bell was an active member of several scientific societies and worked alongside other great minds, including the Wright brothers, who would go on to achieve the first successful powered flight in 1903. Despite his many accomplishments, Bell's legacy would always be intertwined with the telephone. It was the invention that had made him famous, and it was the invention that had forever changed the way the world communicated. But as Bell's work in other fields demonstrated, his influence reached far beyond the realm of telecommunications. In the quiet of Baddeck, Bell found a kind of peace that had eluded him in his earlier years of intense work and public attention. He spent his remaining years pursuing his scientific passions, reflecting on his achievements, and enjoying the company of his wife, Mabel. Bell's life had been one of constant innovation and progress, and his time in Baddeck allowed him to slow down and appreciate the impact of his work. Throughout his life, Alexander Graham Bell remained deeply connected to the deaf community. His work with the deaf began in his early years and continued to influence his career, especially in the development of the telephone. For Bell, the connection between sound and speech was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a deeply personal mission. He'd spent much of his life helping those who could not hear communicate more effectively, and his invention of the telephone was an extension of that desire to bridge the gap between individuals, regardless of their hearing ability. Bell's mother, Eliza Grace Simons, was deaf, and her condition had a profound influence on his early life. Growing up in a household where silence was a constant, Bell had a unique understanding of the challenges faced by the deaf. His mother's deafness not only shaped his childhood, but also inspired him to explore ways to help others like her. He was determined to find methods that would allow the deaf to communicate as effectively as those with normal hearing. From a young age, Bell became fascinated by speech and the mechanics of sound. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a renowned speech expert who developed a system called visible speech, which aimed to teach the deaf how to speak by visually representing sounds. This system helped people with hearing loss learn to speak more clearly, and it served as a foundation for Bell's later work. While Bell himself did not fully adopt his father's visible speech system, he drew from it in developing his own ideas about sound and communication. When Bell began his professional work, he focused on helping the deaf learn to speak, as he believed that speech was essential for their integration into society. He began teaching at the Western School for the Deaf in Toronto, where his methods emphasized the physicality of speech, the positioning of the tongue, lips, and mouth. Bell's goal was to provide his students with the tools to speak in a way that could be understood by others, rather than relying solely on sign language, which was the traditional approach at the time. Bell's methods were revolutionary, and he quickly gained a reputation as an innovative educator. His approach was grounded in his belief that the deaf should be given every opportunity to communicate using their voices. While some of his colleagues in the field of deaf education disagreed with his emphasis on speech, Bell's success with his students spoke for itself. His students were able to speak clearly, and many went on to lead successful lives in a society that often marginalized the deaf. Bell's deep involvement with the deaf community was not just professional, it was personal. His wife, Mabel Gardner Hubbard, was also deaf, having lost her hearing at a young age due to a childhood illness. Their relationship was one of shared understanding, as Mabel, like Bell, was intimately familiar with the challenges of living in a world that was not designed for those with hearing loss. Together, they were a team, united by their commitment to improving the lives of the deaf. Mabel's support was invaluable to Bell throughout his career, especially as he worked on the telephone. Bell's desire to help the deaf was a driving force behind his work on the telephone, and he often spoke about the potential of the invention to transform the lives of the hearing impaired. For Bell, the telephone was not just a tool for communication between hearing individuals, it was a means of breaking down the barriers that separated the deaf from the rest of society. Bell believed that the telephone could be a great equalizer, allowing the deaf to communicate more easily with those who could hear, and vice versa. Bell's commitment to the deaf community was evident in his ongoing work to improve communication devices for the hearing impaired. Even after his invention of the telephone, he continued to experiment with devices that would help the deaf hear better. Bell was also an advocate for the inclusion of the deaf in society. He was a firm believer that the deaf should not be isolated but should be given every opportunity to integrate into the world around them. Bell's relationship with Mabel was a testament to this belief. Mabel was not just his wife, she was his collaborator, his partner, and his inspiration. She played an important role in Bell's work, offering support and encouragement, and she was a constant presence in his life. Mabel's experiences as a deaf individual influenced Bell's work on the telephone, as he sought to create a device that could bridge the gap between those who could hear and those who could not. The telephone, to Bell, was a tool that could help people like Mabel communicate more easily and meaningfully with the world. Bell's efforts to improve the lives of the deaf extended beyond the invention of the telephone. In the 1880s, he helped establish the American Association to Promote the Teaching of Speech to the Deaf, an organization dedicated to advancing the education of the deaf and promoting the use of speech as a means of communication. The organization was an important part of Bell's broader mission to improve the lives of those with hearing loss, and it reflected his belief that the deaf should be able to participate fully in society. Bell's work with the deaf also led to some controversy. As an advocate for oralism, the method of teaching the deaf to speak rather than use sign language, Bell's views were not universally accepted. Many educators and advocates for the deaf community believed that sign language was the best way for the deaf to communicate, and that oralism was a misguided approach. Despite the criticism, Bell remained steadfast in his belief that speech was the key to integration and communication for the deaf. Throughout his life, Bell never wavered in his commitment to the deaf community. His work was driven by a deep empathy and a desire to make the world a more inclusive place for those who could not hear. Bell's contributions to the field of deaf education were groundbreaking, and his work had a lasting impact on the way the deaf were taught to communicate. His invention of the telephone, which brought the world closer together, was just one of the many ways Bell sought to improve the lives of those who were often overlooked. Bell's legacy is not just one of technological achievement, but also of compassion and dedication to a cause that was deeply personal to him. His work with the deaf continues to be remembered as an integral part of his life story, and it serves as a reminder of the power of technology to bridge divides and create a more connected, inclusive world. As Alexander Graham Bell moved into the later stages of his life, he found himself drawn away from the intense public attention that had followed his invention of the telephone. The early years of his success has been filled with groundbreaking achievements, patent battles, and the rapid expansion of his invention into a world-changing force. But in the quiet of his later years, Bell sought peace, reflection, and new scientific pursuits. By then, the telephone was firmly established as one of the most transformative technologies in human history, and Bell's influence on communication was secure, but he continued to work on other ventures, and his mind remained sharp, focused on improving the world in new ways. In 1885, Bell and his wife, Mabel, moved to Baddeck, a small village in Nova Scotia, Canada, where they built a home on a beautiful property overlooking the Brador Lake. The house, named Beanburrows, which means beautiful mountain in Gaelic, became a sanctuary for Bell, a place where he could step away from the bustling world and focus on the things that mattered most to him. For Bell, this quiet environment offered the solitude necessary for deep reflection and continued scientific exploration. Bell's time in Baerdeck was marked by a shift away from the commercial pressures of the telephone business. He had already secured his place in history as the inventor of the telephone, but his curiosity remained insatiable. Bell was never one to rest on his laurels, and he continued to pursue new challenges, particularly in the fields of aviation and hydrofoils. While he would never again experience the same level of fame or public attention that the telephone had brought him, Bell's scientific passions remained as strong as ever. One of his most notable ventures in his later years was his work on aviation. Bell had long been interested in the possibility of flight, and in Baerdeck he assembled a team of researchers to explore the potential for heavier-than-air flight. He had already made important contributions to the understanding of aerodynamics, and in 1891 he and his team developed the first successful powered flight vehicle, the aerodrome. Although the aerodrome did not achieve the level of success that would come with the Wright brothers' flight in 1903, Bell's experiments laid the groundwork for future advances in aviation. Another of Bell's significant pursuits was in the field of hydrofoils. He sought to build a boat that could travel faster by lifting itself above the water, reducing friction, and increasing speed. In 1898, Bell and his team succeeded in creating a hydrofoil known as the HD-4, which reached speeds of more than 70 miles per hour, setting a world record. Bell's hydrofoil research, like his work in aviation, would not receive as much recognition as his telephone invention, but it demonstrated his continued commitment to pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge. Despite his ongoing work in these fields, Bell's thoughts often turned to his legacy, the lasting impact of the telephone and its far-reaching influence on the world. The telephone had become an essential tool for communication, connecting people across vast distances. It was a technology that had touched nearly every aspect of life, from business and government to personal relationships. Bell could not have anticipated the full extent of the telephone's impact, but he was deeply proud of the role his invention had played in changing the world. Bell's later years were not without challenges. In addition to his scientific work, Bell faced personal struggles, including the decline in his health. As he grew older, his health began to deteriorate, and he was no longer able to devote himself to his experiments with the same intensity that had characterized his earlier years. Yet despite the challenges of aging, Bell remained active in his work and continued to pursue his passions. His relationship with Mabel, who had been his constant companion and supporter throughout their lives together, also remained a central aspect of his later years. Mabel, who had lost her hearing at a young age, had been both Bell's inspiration and partner in many of his endeavours. Together they had created a life filled with purpose and scientific exploration. As Bell's health declined, Mabel's presence in his life remained a source of comfort and strength. Bell also continued to maintain ties with the scientific community. He remained involved in various scientific societies and was an active participant in the intellectual life of his time. His contributions to the fields of acoustics, communication, and invention were widely respected, and he was often sought after for advice and counsel by younger generations of scientists and inventors. Despite his advancing years, Bell's mind remained sharp, and he continued to think deeply about the future of technology. Though Bell's contributions to the world were undeniable, his later years were marked by a growing sense of reflection. He often looked back on his life and the impact of his work, but he also expressed a sense of peace in knowing that his inventions had helped shape the course of human history. The telephone, which had begun as a personal passion and a desire to help the deaf communicate more effectively, had become one of the most important inventions of the modern era. Bell's legacy as the father of the telephone was firmly established, and his place in history was secure. In his final years, Bell's health declined further. He suffered from a variety of ailments, but he continued to live at Bainbrig with Mabel by his side. He died on August 2nd, 1922, at the age of 75, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to shape the world for generations to come. Bell's death marked the end of an era, but his contributions to communication and technology would live on. On August 2nd, 1922, Alexander Graham Bell passed away at the age of 75 in his home in Baddeck, Nova Scotia. His death marked the end of a remarkable life, one defined by intellectual curiosity, scientific achievement, and a deep commitment to improving the world. Bell had lived long enough to see his invention of the telephone become a permanent fixture in society, revolutionizing communication and shaping the future of human interaction. But even as Bell's life came to a close, the world was already irrevocably changed by his contributions. Bell's passing was met with an outpouring of tributes from around the world. Leaders, scientists, and inventors alike recognized the profound impact he had made. The telephone had become not just a luxury for the wealthy, but an essential tool for everyday life. It was hard to imagine a world without this invention, which had transformed the way people communicated, worked, and lived. In the wake of his death, Bell's legacy became a central part of the story of modern communication. The telephone was everywhere, connecting people across countries and continents. What had begun as an experiment to help the deaf had become a global network, one that would lay the foundation for all future innovations in telecommunications. But Bell's work was not confined to the telephone. He had contributed to the development of other technologies, such as the hydrofoil and the aerodrome, and he'd spent his later years working on advances in aviation and other fields. His intellectual curiosity had been boundless, and his drive to make the world a better place had extended far beyond his most famous invention. Bell's legacy also included his contributions to the field of education, particularly for the deaf. His work had revolutionized the way the deaf were taught to communicate, with an emphasis on speech and sound. While his methods were controversial, especially his promotion of oralism over sign language, they had a lasting impact on the field of deaf education. His invention of the telephone as well was born from his desire to improve communication for the deaf, and he remained committed to helping them throughout his life. Beyond his professional achievements, Bell was known for his character and humility. He never sought fame or wealth, though he certainly attained both. Instead, he was driven by a desire to understand the world around him and to contribute to the betterment of humanity. He often downplayed his own role in the invention of the telephone, attributing much of his success to the work of others, and he acknowledged that the ideas for the telephone were part of a broader intellectual movement of the time. Bell's influence extended far beyond his immediate family and colleagues. His work inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and inventors, and his impact can still be felt today. The telephone, in its many forms, has become the primary means of communication for people around the globe, from the simple landline to the mobile phone and beyond. What Bell started in the late 19th century has evolved into an ever-expanding world of digital communication, yet the core principle remains the same. Bell's vision of a connected world was realized, and its effects are still being felt in modern society. In the years after his death, Bell's legacy was honored in many ways. Monuments were erected in his name, and schools and institutions were named after him. The Bell Telephone Company, which he had founded, became one of the largest and most influential companies in the world, eventually evolving into AT&T, a major player in global telecommunications. His name became synonymous with communication, and his contributions to technology were widely celebrated. Yet despite the widespread recognition of his achievements, there were moments when Bell's work was overshadowed by controversy. The patent battles over the invention of the telephone, particularly the disputes with Elisha Gray, left a lingering question about who should truly be credited with the invention. While Bell's patent was upheld in court, and he is universally regarded as the inventor of the telephone, the legal battles were a source of tension that would follow him throughout his career. There were also debates about Bell's approach to the deaf community. His promotion of oralism and his focus on teaching the deaf to speak rather than use sign language was a contentious issue. Many in the deaf community viewed sign language as the most effective and natural means of communication, while Bell believed that speech was the key to integration into society. These differing views created divisions, and Bell's influence in the field of deaf education remains a topic of debate to this day. However, there is no doubt that his work helped raise awareness of the challenges faced by the deaf and laid the groundwork for future advances in the field. In a broader sense, Bell's legacy is defined by the way he combined scientific curiosity with practical invention. He was not just an inventor of theoretical concepts. His work was grounded in the desire to solve real-world problems. The telephone, for example, was not just a marvel of engineering, but a tool that allowed people to connect, communicate, and collaborate in ways that were previously impossible. Bell's inventions changed the way people interacted with each other, making the world a smaller, more interconnected place. Bell's death marked the end of an era, but his influence would continue to shape the future of technology and communication. His work paved the way for innovations that would follow, and his vision of a connected world would become a reality in ways he could never have imagined. Bell's life was a testament to the power of curiosity, perseverance, and the desire to make a difference. His legacy endures in the world of communication and in the countless lives that have been touched by his work. Alexander Graham. Bell's life was not just defined by his work as an inventor and educator. It was equally shaped by the strong, supportive relationships he maintained with his family. While he was known for his groundbreaking contributions to science, Bell's personal life was also a source of inspiration, guiding him through challenges and providing him with a sense of purpose throughout his career. One of the most significant relationships in Bell's life was with his wife, Mabel Gardner Hubbard. Mabel was profoundly important to Bell, not only because she shared his passion for improving communication for the deaf, but because she was, herself, deaf. Losing her hearing at a young age due to a childhood illness, Mabel had been profoundly influenced by her own experiences of isolation and the challenges of communicating in a hearing world. In this way, she shared a unique understanding with Bell of the struggles faced by the deaf. Bell first met Mabel when he was teaching at the Boston School for the Deaf, where her father, Gardner Hubbard, sought Bell's expertise in helping Mabel improve her speech. The two quickly formed a close bond. Mabel, who was highly intelligent and independent, became not only Bell's student but also his confidant, collaborator, and later, his wife. Their marriage, which took place in 1877, would last until Bell's death, and throughout their life together, Mabel was a steady source of encouragement and support for him. While Bell's achievements as an inventor and educator are well known, it was his deep devotion to Mabel that played a key role in many of his most important decisions. Bell's interest in inventing the telephone was, in part, fueled by a desire to help the deaf community communicate more effectively, especially for people like Mabel. Bell's work with the telephone was not merely academic or professional for him. It was deeply personal. He saw it as a tool to improve the lives of people who, like his wife, had been marginalized due to their hearing impairment. Mabel's influence on Bell's work went beyond the personal. She was also a critical partner in Bell's scientific endeavors. Mabel was highly educated and deeply involved in many aspects of Bell's work, providing not only moral support but intellectual collaboration. Bell often spoke highly of Mabel's contributions, and it's clear that her partnership helped shape his thinking as he navigated the challenges of both life and science. The couple's relationship also had its challenges. Bell was intensely focused on his work, and this sometimes created tension in their marriage. Nevertheless, Mabel was unwavering in her support for his endeavors, and she often encouraged him to pursue his scientific ideas, no matter how unconventional they might seem. Their shared commitment to improving the lives of the deaf community helped forge a lasting bond between them that remained strong throughout their marriage. In addition to Mabel, Bell was also very close to his family. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a prominent linguist and speech teacher, whose work with speech and phonetics laid the foundation for much of Bell's own career. Bell's father was instrumental in shaping his early interest in sound and communication, and Bell often acknowledged his father's influence. Bell's mother, Eliza Grace Simons, was deaf, and her condition had a profound effect on Bell's life from an early age. Growing up in a household with a deaf mother, Bell had a unique understanding of the challenges of deafness, and this early exposure helped shape his lifelong commitment to improving communication for the deaf. Bell's relationship with his family provided him with a deep sense of purpose and motivation. His experiences growing up in a family deeply involved in the world of speech, sound, and communication helped solidify Bell's desire to improve the lives of others. His family not only supported his intellectual pursuits, but also provided him with a foundation of love and encouragement that helped him navigate the challenges of his professional life. Despite the intense pressures of his scientific career, Bell made a concerted effort to maintain a close relationship with his family throughout his life. Even as he became increasingly focused on his work, Bell made sure to spend time with Mabel and his relatives. Their support and care were crucial to his ability to remain grounded, even in the face of the immense fame and responsibility that came with his role as one of the world's foremost inventors. As Alexander Graham Bell entered his later years, his health began to decline, presenting him with personal challenges that contrasted with the brilliant and productive years of his earlier life. Bell had always been an intensely focused individual, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a passion for improving the world through his inventions. Yet, as the years passed, the toll of age and illness gradually limited his ability to engage in the physical and mental labor that had once been his life's work. Throughout much of his career, Bell had been plagued by various health issues. He had a tendency to overwork, often dedicating long hours to his scientific pursuits, and his health was frequently impacted by his demanding schedule. He struggled with a variety of ailments, ranging from respiratory problems to frequent bouts of fatigue. In his earlier years, these issues were manageable, but as he grew older, they became more pronounced, affecting his daily life. Bell's health issues intensified in the 1910s, when he began to suffer from more serious ailments. One of the most significant struggles he faced was his declining hearing. While Bell had spent much of his life helping the deaf communicate, he too faced the challenges of hearing loss in his own later years. His personal experience with hearing impairment mirrored the difficulties he had worked so hard to address for others, making it all the more poignant. Though his hearing loss did not entirely inhibit his ability to communicate, it certainly altered his lifestyle. It was a reminder that even those who have dedicated their lives to improving the lives of others can be deeply affected by the challenges they seek to overcome. As his physical health continued to decline, Bell found it increasingly difficult to engage in his scientific work at the same level he had during his earlier years. His vision too began to fade, and this further limited his ability to carry out the experiments and projects that had once been his passion. The man who had once been at the forefront of cutting-edge science and invention now found himself limited by the very conditions he had sought to alleviate for others. Despite these health struggles, Bell remained mentally sharp and engaged. He continued to explore new scientific concepts and sought new ways to contribute to the fields that had defined his career. His interest in aeronautics, hydrofoils, and optical communication remained strong, and even in his later years he worked diligently on new projects. Bell's intellectual curiosity never waned, and he maintained his desire to explore the mysteries of science until the end of his life. However, the physical limitations he faced made it increasingly difficult for him to bring these ideas to fruition. Throughout this time, Bell's family, particularly his wife Mabel, played a crucial role in supporting him through his health challenges. Mabel, who had long been his partner in both life and work, continued to offer unwavering support. She had been Bell's greatest collaborator, helping him navigate the challenges of deafness, and she remained by his side through the trials of his aging years. Their bond remained strong, and Mabel's presence was a source of great comfort for Bell. Despite the challenges, Bell found solace in his home in Baddeck, Nova Scotia, where he had retired in his later years. The peaceful surroundings of Bainbray, nestled by the Brador Lake, provided a quiet refuge from the pressures of public life. Here, Bell could reflect on his achievements and continue to pursue his scientific interests at a slower pace. The tranquility of Baddeck allowed Bell to focus on the things that truly mattered to him in his final years: his family, his work, and his legacy. Bell's health struggles were a reminder of the fragility of human life, even for those who have achieved great things. Yet, despite the limitations of his physical condition, Bell continued to maintain a sense of purpose. His work with the deaf community, his contributions to science, and his dedication to improving communication for all people were central to his identity. Bell's health may have been declining, but his commitment to these ideals remained steadfast. As the years passed, Bell's health continued to deteriorate. He experienced increasing difficulty with mobility, and his physical strength continued to decline. Yet even as his body weakened, Bell's mind remained sharp, and he continued to contribute to the scientific community in whatever way he could. His health struggles did not diminish his belief in the power of innovation, and he continued to see the potential for new discoveries. Even in the face of personal hardship, Bell's health became a metaphor for the challenges he had faced throughout his life. He had often encountered obstacles, scientific, personal, and professional, but had always overcome them with determination and a strong sense of purpose. His declining health, while a challenge, did not prevent him from continuing to engage with the world of science and invention, even in his later years. In the end, Bell's health struggles were a reminder that even the greatest minds are subject to the natural process of aging. Yet despite these challenges, Bell's legacy endured. His work transformed the way the world communicated, and his dedication to science and technology left an indelible mark on history. Even as Alexander Graham Bell's health began to decline in his later years, his dedication to education and advocacy never wavered. Throughout his life, Bell had always believed in the power of education to change the world, and he worked tirelessly to improve the lives of those who are marginalized or misunderstood. His involvement in education, especially for the deaf, and his advocacy for science and innovation continued to shape his actions well into his later years. Bell's work with the deaf was one of his life's most significant contributions. He believed that the deaf should be given every opportunity to communicate and integrate into society. His passion for this cause had led him to invent the telephone, but it also influenced much of his work throughout his life. As a teacher, Bell focused on helping the deaf learn to speak, believing that oralism, teaching the deaf to communicate through speech rather than sign language, was the key to their social integration. Though this approach was controversial, particularly among those who supported sign language as the best means of communication for the deaf, Bell's commitment to improving the lives of the deaf community was unwavering. In his later years, Bell continued to advocate for the deaf, not just in his personal work, but in his involvement with various organizations. One of his major contributions in this area was his role in the founding of the American Association to Promote the Teaching of Speech to the Deaf, an organization dedicated to advancing the education of the deaf and promoting the use of speech. This organization, which Bell helped establish in the 1890s, played a crucial role in shaping the future of deaf education in the United States. Through his work with this group, Bell sought to promote a broader acceptance of oralism, encouraging educators to adopt methods that allowed the deaf to communicate using speech. Bell's advocacy for education extended beyond the deaf community. As a firm believer in the transformative power of science and education, he continually sought ways to improve the way knowledge was shared and disseminated. Throughout his life, Bell advocated for the inclusion of science and innovation in education, often speaking out about the importance of scientific inquiry and technological advancement. He believed that education should not only prepare students for life in a traditional sense, but should also encourage them to think critically, ask questions, and seek out new knowledge. This vision for education was one that Bell carried with him throughout his career, and he actively worked to establish institutions that would further these ideals. Bell's involvement in education also included his work with various scientific institutions and societies. He was a founding member of the National Geographic Society, and in this capacity he helped promote the value of scientific exploration and discovery. Through his advocacy, Bell sought to inspire future generations of scientists and explorers to push the boundaries of human knowledge and to view the world through the lens of curiosity and innovation. Beyond his work with the deaf and his involvement in scientific organizations, Bell's advocacy for education took many forms. He spent considerable time supporting scientific research and promoting the integration of new technologies into the classroom. His belief in the importance of education was evident in his actions, as he continued to support the development of educational programs, encourage young minds to pursue science, and work with institutions that sought to improve education at all levels. In his later years, Bell's health may have limited his ability to travel and engage with the scientific community as he once had, but his commitment to education and advocacy remained strong. He continued to speak out on issues he believed were important, advocating for scientific exploration, the improvement of education for the deaf, and the development of new technologies that could improve people's lives. Bell remained a figure of authority in these fields, and his opinions continued to shape the direction of the scientific community. Though Bell's contributions to education were vast, his advocacy for the deaf community remained one of the most personal and meaningful aspects of his legacy. His deep understanding of the challenges faced by the deaf, combined with his belief in the potential of technology to improve communication, motivated him to work tirelessly on behalf of the deaf throughout his life. His efforts helped to shape the way deaf education evolved in the 20th century, and his work continues to influence the field to this day. Despite the controversies surrounding his methods, particularly his promotion of oralism over sign language, Bell's influence on the education of the deaf cannot be understated. His advocacy for the use of speech as a tool for communication helped shift the focus of deaf education towards speech and oral communication, although sign language would ultimately be recognized as an essential tool for the deaf as well. Bell's contributions to the field of deaf education remain an important part of his legacy, as his work brought awareness to the challenges of the deaf and inspired future generations of educators and advocates to continue working toward improving the lives of the hearing impaired. In summary, Alexander Graham Bell's advocacy for education and his work with the deaf community were integral parts of his life's mission. Even as his health declined in his later years, Bell remained dedicated to these causes, continuing to work tirelessly to improve the lives of others. His efforts in promoting education, particularly for the deaf, as well as his support for scientific exploration and technological advancement, have left an indelible mark on history. Bell's advocacy and commitment to education remain vital components of his legacy, and they continue to inspire individuals around the world to pursue knowledge, challenge conventional thinking, and strive to improve the lives of others. While Alexander Graham Bell is most famous for his invention of the telephone, his contributions to science and technology extended far beyond this iconic achievement. Bell was a true polymath, with a wide array of interests and a deep curiosity that drove him to explore many different fields. Throughout his life, he sought to improve the world through invention, always looking for ways to address challenges and solve problems. His work in fields such as aeronautics, hydrofoils, and optical communication laid the foundation for future innovations, further cementing his place as one of history's greatest inventors. One of Bell's most significant pursuits outside of the telephone was his work in the field of aeronautics. Bell had always been fascinated by the possibility of flight, and he was determined to contribute to the development of aviation. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, flight was still a dream, but Bell's research helped advance the field considerably. He spent considerable time studying aerodynamics and experimented with various designs for flying machines. In 1891, Bell and his team, which included engineers and researchers, created the first successful powered flying machine, the aerodrome. This was a major step forward in aviation history. Though it was not capable of carrying a person at the time, the aerodrome demonstrated that heavier-than-air flight was possible, and it laid the groundwork for the eventual breakthroughs that would come in the early 20th century with pioneers like the Wright brothers. Bell's aerodrome, though not successful in carrying humans, marked a significant milestone in understanding flight mechanics and the potential for powered aviation. Bell's interest in aviation continued throughout his life. His passion for flight did not end with the aerodrome, and he went on to create new prototypes and develop further designs. He was also involved in the development of the first practical flying machine capable of carrying a person, though he was ultimately surpassed by others in the field, most notably the Wright brothers, who achieved the first powered flight in 1903. However, Bell's contributions to the study of aerodynamics and flight remained influential, and his work in this area continues to be recognized for its importance in the early days of aviation. Bell's work in hydrofoils was another area where he made lasting contributions to science and technology. Hydrofoils are boats designed to lift above the water's surface as they gain speed, reducing friction and allowing for faster travel. This technology had the potential to revolutionize naval transportation, and Bell, ever the innovator, was determined to explore its possibilities. In 1898, Bell and his team successfully created the HD-4, a hydrofoil that reached speeds of over 70 miles per hour. This was a remarkable achievement at the time, setting a world record for speed on water. The HD-4 was the result of Bell's careful research into reducing the drag caused by water friction, and his desire to build a faster, more efficient vehicle. Although the hydrofoil did not achieve widespread commercial success during Bell's lifetime, it provided important insights into the possibilities of high-speed transportation and laid the foundation for future developments in the field. Bell's contributions to hydrofoils also influenced later advancements in boat design and speed. Although he did not achieve the level of fame for his work in hydrofoils as he did with the telephone, his innovations were far-reaching, and his work in this field is still acknowledged by engineers and inventors today. In addition to his work in aviation and hydrofoils, Bell also made contributions to the field of optical communication. In the 1880s, he became interested in the potential for using light to transmit information. He experimented with various methods of optical telegraphy, which involved using light signals to communicate over long distances. Bell's work in this area was an early precursor to the development of fiber optic communication, which would later revolutionize global telecommunications. Bell's optical telegraphy work, though not widely known, was a testament to his constant drive to innovate. His experiments with light-based communication foreshadowed the many advancements that would come in the 20th century in the field of optical technologies, including the eventual development of fiber optic cables and laser communications. Though Bell's optical communication methods were not commercially successful, his early efforts provided the groundwork for these technologies, which would play a critical role in shaping the modern communications landscape. Throughout his career, Bell never limited himself to a single field of study. His curiosity and willingness to explore new ideas drove him to investigate a wide range of scientific disciplines. He was particularly interested in finding practical solutions to real-world problems, using his inventions to improve the lives of people around the world. Whether it was through his work with the deaf, his studies in aviation and hydrofoils, or his experiments in optical communication, Bell's life was marked by a constant desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. Bell's multifaceted contributions to science and technology were not just about invention for the sake of invention. He believed that technology should serve humanity, and he sought to create tools that would make the world a better place. This philosophy was evident in all of his work, whether it was the telephone, the aerodrome, the hydrofoil, or his optical communication experiments. Bell's inventions were grounded in a deep sense of purpose, driven by the idea that innovation should improve the human condition. Bell's work outside of the telephone often went unrecognized during his lifetime, overshadowed by the fame of his greatest invention. Yet, his contributions to these other fields laid the foundation for future advances in technology, and his interdisciplinary approach to science continues to inspire inventors and researchers to this day. Bell's legacy as a scientist and inventor is not just defined by the telephone, but by his unrelenting curiosity and his dedication to improving the world through innovation. The legacy of Alexander Graham Bell, though undeniably one of profound achievement, has been marked by a complex and varied public perception. In the years following his groundbreaking invention of the telephone, Bell's reputation evolved in a way that reflects both his extraordinary contributions to science and the controversies that surrounded his work. While Bell was lauded as one of the greatest inventors of his time, his legacy was not without challenges, especially in terms of how history would remember him and the manner in which his ideas would be received by the public. At the height of his career, Bell was widely regarded as a visionary. The telephone, as the first practical means of transmitting voice over a distance, was one of the most transformative inventions of the 19th century. People marveled at the idea of talking to someone miles away, and the implications for business, politics, and personal life were vast. As the telephone became integrated into everyday life, Bell's name became synonymous with communication, and he was celebrated as the man who made the world smaller. However, Bell's journey was not without its share of obstacles. The most prominent of these was the fierce patent dispute with Elisha Gray, which cast a long shadow over Bell's reputation. Though Bell was awarded the patent for the invention of the telephone, the bitter legal battle raised questions about the originality of his work. Many, particularly Gray's supporters, believed that Bell had simply taken the ideas of other inventors, including Gray, and adapted them into a successful patent. While the legal system ultimately sided with Bell, this controversy left lingering doubts about the fairness of the patent process and the true origins of the telephone. As a result, Bell's success was sometimes seen as the result of timing, litigation, and the support of powerful investors, rather than pure innovation. This legal battle, and the subsequent questioning of his intellectual ownership of the telephone, contributed to a more nuanced public perception of Bell. While many still saw him as the rightful inventor, there were others who believed that his patent was more the product of a contested process than a singular moment of genius. Bell, for his part, was often reluctant to take full credit for the invention, acknowledging the contributions of others and downplaying his role in the telephone's creation. Despite his reluctance, the public largely accepted the official story that Bell was the inventor, and his name became forever linked to the device. In addition to the patent dispute, Bell's work with the deaf community also played a pivotal role in shaping his reputation. As an advocate for oralism, teaching the deaf to communicate through speech rather than sign language, Bell found himself at odds with many in the deaf community, who favoured sign language as the most natural form of communication. Bell's approach was based on his belief that speech was the key to integrating the deaf into society, and he believed that oralism would give the deaf greater opportunities in a world that largely communicated through speech. However, many deaf individuals and advocates felt that Bell's emphasis on oralism marginalized their language and culture. This controversy over the education of the deaf created tensions between Bell and the deaf community, and in some circles it became a point of criticism. While Bell's intentions were clearly to improve the lives of the deaf, his methods were not universally accepted, and his legacy in the field of deaf education remains a subject of debate. Those who championed sign language saw Bell's oralism as an imposition, one that denied the richness and validity of their language. Despite the controversy, Bell's impact on the field of deaf education was significant. His work led to greater awareness of the challenges faced by the deaf and inspired many educators to rethink how to teach and communicate with this community. Nonetheless, Bell's stance on oralism and his preference for speech over sign language has remained a point of contention. In his later years, Bell's reputation became more closely tied to his broader contributions to science and technology. His work in aviation, hydrofoils, and optical communication remained important, though less well known than his work on the telephone. These fields, while groundbreaking in their own right, did not receive the same level of attention or acclaim as the telephone, and Bell's efforts were sometimes overshadowed by his earlier success. Yet, his commitment to innovation in various scientific fields contributed to the enduring view of Bell as a pioneer in multiple areas of technology. His contributions to aviation, for example, paved the way for future developments in flight, even if he did not achieve the fame of the Wright brothers. Despite the controversies surrounding his patent and his educational methods, Bell's later years were marked by a quiet acceptance of his place in history. He continued to be regarded as a visionary inventor, but the controversies surrounding the telephone's patent and his views on deaf education did complicate his legacy. To some, Bell was a genius who had truly revolutionized communication, while to others, his reputation was clouded by the legal battles and the contentious issues related to his work with the deaf. Bell's personal character also shaped his public image. Those who knew him described him as humble, driven, and deeply committed to his work. He was a man of integrity who genuinely sought to improve the lives of others, particularly the deaf, and his motivations were often seen as pure. However, his reluctance to take full credit for his achievements, combined with the public's growing awareness of the controversies surrounding the telephone, meant that Bell's reputation was often viewed with a sense of ambivalence. Was he the humble genius whose invention changed the world, or was he the inventor who profited from a contested patent? This complexity in his public perception only added to the multifaceted nature of his legacy. In the end, history has largely embraced Alexander Graham Bell as the inventor of the telephone, and his contributions to communication and science are undeniable. Yet his reputation remains a subject of both admiration and critique. Bell's legacy is a testament to the complexities of innovation and the challenges that come with being at the forefront of technological change. While the telephone remains his most celebrated achievement, his work in other scientific fields and his advocacy for the deaf continue to shape how we understand him today. The death of Alexander Graham Bell on August 2, 1922 marked the end of an era. He was 75 years old, having lived a life filled with remarkable achievements that changed the course of human history. By the time of his passing, Bell's invention of the telephone had become one of the most important innovations in communication, forever altering how people interacted with one another across distances. But even as Bell's life came to a close, the world he had helped shape continued to evolve and grow, his legacy growing deeper with every passing year. In the wake of his death, tributes poured in from around the world. Scientific communities, business leaders, and everyday citizens all acknowledged the profound impact that Bell had made on the world. As the inventor of the telephone, Bell had connected millions of people, transcending the limitations of time and space that had once defined human communication. His invention was so revolutionary that it seemed almost miraculous at the time, and its importance only grew as technology progressed. The telephone was, and still is, a foundational part of modern life. Bell passed away quietly at his home in Baddeck, Nova Scotia, surrounded by his family, including his wife Mabel. His legacy as a pioneer of communication and technology was already well established, but it was only after his death that the full scope of his influence began to come into focus. Bell's contributions to society were vast, and his work continued to impact generations of scientists, engineers, and inventors who followed in his footsteps. Though he is most often remembered for the telephone, Bell's work in other areas of science, particularly in aviation, hydrofoils, and optical communication, also left a significant mark. His commitment to experimentation and his relentless drive to solve complex problems had propelled him into a number of fields, and his innovations continued to inspire others long after he had passed. Bell's interest in flight, for example, paved the way for future advancements in aviation, even if his own attempts at flight did not meet the same success as the Wright brothers. His work in hydrofoils helped to lay the foundation for faster watercraft, while his early work with optical communication foreshadowed later developments in fiber optics and telecommunications. Bell's death did not diminish the widespread recognition of his work. In fact, in many ways, it solidified his place in history as one of the most influential figures of the modern era. As the 20th century progressed, the impact of his telephone continued to grow. New developments in communication technology, such as the rise of mobile phones, the internet, and video conferencing, can trace their roots back to the work Bell began in the late 19th century. The telephone itself underwent many changes and improvements over the years, but Bell's original vision remained intact: to connect people no matter the distance. The telephone became a tool that facilitated personal and professional relationships, bridged gaps in communication, and created entirely new opportunities for global commerce and interaction. Today, millions of people around the world rely on the telephone in some form, whether through traditional landlines, mobile phones, or internet-based communication services. Bell's influence on communication and technology extended far beyond the telephone. In many ways, the telephone became a symbol of his larger vision of human connectivity. Bell's work was never solely about creating a product. It was about improving the lives of people by creating a more interconnected world. The invention of the telephone was only one step in a lifelong journey of exploration, and Bell's legacy was one of using science and innovation to solve the challenges faced by society. In addition to his work in communication, Bell's contributions to the education of the deaf also continued to resonate after his death. His commitment to improving the lives of the hearing impaired was a driving force behind much of his scientific work. The methods he developed for teaching the deaf to speak had a profound impact on the field of deaf education. Though his advocacy for oralism, or the use of speech over sign language, remains a subject of debate. Regardless of the controversy, Bell's work helped raise awareness of the challenges faced by the deaf and brought the importance of communication to the forefront of public consciousness. Bell's death also marked the end of a personal era for his family. Mabel, his wife and closest collaborator, outlived him by several years, continuing to champion his legacy. Though Bell had always downplayed his own role in the creation of the telephone, attributing much of his success to the work of others, his family and supporters were unwavering in their recognition of his genius. Mabel, who had been by Bell's side through both his scientific endeavours and his personal struggles, continued to honour his memory after his passing. In the years following Bell's death, his contributions to science and society were commemorated in many ways. Monuments were erected in his honour, and educational institutions and research organisations were named after him. His work with the deaf was remembered through various educational programs, and his name became synonymous with the advancement of communication. The Bell Telephone Company, which he had founded, became a cornerstone of the telecommunications industry, eventually evolving into AT&T, one of the largest and most influential companies in the world. The enduring influence of Bell's work became even clearer in the 20th century as the world continued to grow more interconnected through the advent of new technologies. The mobile phone revolutionized communication, allowing people to stay connected regardless of where they were, and the internet connected the world in ways that Bell could have scarcely imagined. And yet, despite these advances, the fundamental principles that Bell had established in the invention of the telephone remain the same. The desire to connect people and improve communication. Bell's legacy as an inventor, educator, and advocate for the deaf continues to inspire generations. His work helped to shape the world we live in today, and his contributions to science and technology are a testament to the power of innovation and curiosity. Though he may no longer be with us, Alexander Graham Bell's impact endures, and his vision of a connected world remains as relevant as ever. As the world moved further into the 20th century, the impact of Alexander Graham Bell's work continued to reverberate. The telephone, his most famous invention, became more than just a tool for communication. It became a symbol of progress, of how human ingenuity could overcome barriers of distance and bring people together. Though Bell passed away in 1922, his legacy is firmly embedded in the fabric of modern society. The inventions, ideas, and philosophies he introduced continue to shape the world we live in today. Bell's vision of a connected world has become a reality in ways he could never have fully imagined. The telephone, in its various forms, is now one of the most ubiquitous technologies on the planet, from landlines to mobile phones, from satellite communications to the internet. The ability to communicate across distances has transformed the way humanity interacts. Bell's invention laid the groundwork for all of these advancements, opening the door for the telecommunications industry to grow and evolve into the global network we rely on today. However, Bell's legacy extends far beyond the telephone itself. His work in acoustics, optical communication, and aeronautics also paved the way for major advancements in science and technology. In particular, his early experiments with transmitting sound through light foreshadowed the development of fiber optic communication, which now forms the backbone of much of the world's digital infrastructure. Bell's interest in aviation, while not as commercially successful as his work on the telephone, contributed to the understanding of aerodynamics and helped lay the groundwork for future advances in flight. His work with hydrofoils, although more of a curiosity than a practical breakthrough in his time, provided important lessons in fluid dynamics and boat design, influencing future innovations in marine technology. Bell's advocacy for education, particularly for the deaf, also remains a crucial part of his legacy. While his approach to deaf education, favouring oralism over sign language, was controversial and remains a subject of debate, his efforts to improve communication for the deaf community were groundbreaking. Bell's work inspired others to develop more inclusive and effective methods of communication for the deaf, and his insistence on the importance of speech for social integration changed the landscape of deaf education. Today, his influence is still felt in the ways we think about communication access for individuals with disabilities, even as the specific technologies Bell developed, such as the original telephone system, have evolved and transformed. His broader influence on innovation, invention, and human connection has not faded. Bell's work continues to inspire future generations of engineers, inventors, and scientists. His belief in the power of technology to improve lives, his relentless curiosity, and his drive to solve the problems of his time all remain central to the ethos of scientific exploration. The telephone, of course, remains the centerpiece of Bell's enduring influence. However, the world Bell imagined, one where people could communicate instantly across great distances, has continued to grow far beyond the realm of voice communication. The modern-day equivalents of Bell's invention, including mobile phones, video conferencing, and even social media platforms, have created entirely new ways for people to stay connected. The foundational principles of Bell's invention, that communication should be fast, reliable, and accessible, continue to drive the development of new technologies in the telecommunications industry. The expansion of the internet and the rise of digital communications are a direct extension of Bell's early efforts. While Bell's direct involvement in the telephone industry ended long before the digital age arrived, his pioneering work set the stage for the wireless communications and information technologies that have transformed society. The world today is more interconnected than ever before, and Bell's telephone can be seen as the starting point for the entire global communications network that continues to shape the course of modern history. Bell's work also left an indelible mark on the way we think about scientific progress. His approach to invention was never just about creating products, it was about solving problems. He sought to improve people's lives through his inventions, driven by the belief that science and technology should serve humanity. This philosophy of invention for the betterment of society became a cornerstone of modern technological development. Today, we continue to follow Bell's example, striving to create innovations that improve accessibility, foster connectivity, and solve real-world problems. Bell's impact can also be seen in the continued development of telecommunications infrastructure. The systems that now enable instant communication from fiber optic cables to wireless networks are direct descendants of Bell's early experiments with transmitting sound. The way we communicate today, whether through text messages, emails, or video calls, is all built on the foundation that Bell laid with the telephone. Though Bell did not live to see the full extent of the technological advancements his work set in motion, his legacy is undeniable. The telephone is not merely a tool, it is a transformative technology that has reshaped the course of human history. It has connected people across continents, helped build global industries, and changed the way societies function. The reach of Bell's invention is so vast that it is hard to imagine modern life without it. As Bell's work continues to influence our world, it is important to recognize that his contributions were not just technical, they were deeply human. Bell believed in the power of communication to bring people together, to bridge divides, and to create understanding. In a world that continues to grapple with division and distance, his vision of a connected world remains a beacon for the future. As the years passed after Alexander Graham Bell's death, his legacy only grew. Though he was no longer physically present, the world he had shaped through his inventions, ideas, and advocacy continued to thrive. Bell's contributions to communication, technology, and education remained pivotal in shaping the modern world. His life's work had transformed the way people interacted with each other, transcending borders, cultures, and distances, and his vision for a connected world had become a reality. Yet Bell's own personal reflections, particularly in his later years, reveal the humbler aspects of his character and the deep sense of purpose that guided his efforts throughout his life. Looking back on his achievements, Bell would have likely seen himself not as the single genius who changed the world, but as a contributor to a larger movement of human progress. The invention of the telephone, while revolutionary, was the culmination of years of research, collaboration, and incremental advancements. Bell often credited the work of others in shaping his ideas, demonstrating his belief in the collaborative nature of invention. He believed that progress was never achieved in isolation, and that it was through shared knowledge, effort, and ingenuity that significant breakthroughs were made. One of Bell's defining qualities was his relentless curiosity. From an early age, he had been captivated by sound, speech, and the mechanisms of communication. This curiosity drove him to push the boundaries of what was thought possible, and to experiment with ideas that, at the time seemed almost fantastical. His work in fields as diverse as aeronautics, hydrofoils, and optical communication reflected a mind constantly seeking to understand the world and improve it. Bell's final years were marked by a continued exploration of new ideas, even as his health began to decline. It was this insatiable desire for discovery that defined him, not just as an inventor, but as a man who wanted to leave the world better than he found it. Bell's work with the deaf community was also central to his life's mission. His desire to help the deaf communicate, particularly through speech, was not driven by a desire for personal glory, but by his belief in the potential for technology to improve lives. His creation of the telephone, while providing a means for millions to communicate, was a direct result of his personal connection to the challenges faced by the deaf. His mother's deafness, his father's work in speech and phonetics, and his wife Mabel's own deafness all played a profound role in shaping his perspective and inspiring his lifelong commitment to finding ways to bridge the gap between the hearing and non-hearing worlds. In his later years, Bell would have known that the telephone was only one part of his legacy. His work on hydrofoils and his early experiments with flight were, in many ways, equally significant if less widely acknowledged. His contributions to these fields, though overshadowed by the success of the telephone, laid the groundwork for future innovations. His experiments with flying machines and watercraft, though they did not achieve immediate success, were foundational to the development of aviation and modern maritime technology. In many ways, Bell's work transcended the telephone, as his contributions influenced multiple scientific fields and shaped the trajectory of technological advancement in the 20th century. But perhaps the most enduring part of Bell's legacy is the way in which his inventions and ideas helped create a more interconnected world. The telephone, of course, was the catalyst for this change, but the global communication networks that arose from it laid the foundation for the world as we know it today. The ability to communicate across vast distances was a game changer, not only for individuals but for businesses, governments, and institutions. Bell's invention bridged gaps, allowing people to connect, collaborate, and share ideas in ways that were previously unimaginable. This interconnectedness has only grown over time. With the advent of mobile phones, the internet, and digital communication technologies, all of which can trace their roots back to Bell's original vision of a connected world. The influence of Bell's work continues to be felt in the ongoing evolution of communication technologies. As new forms of communication emerge, the core principle that Bell introduced, the idea that people should be able to communicate easily and effectively across distances, remains unchanged. The rise of mobile phones, video calls, and social media platforms has built upon the foundation Bell laid, and the continuing expansion of the internet and digital technologies further reinforces the enduring relevance of his work. Yet, beyond the technological advancements that stemmed from his inventions, Bell's legacy also lies in his commitment to using science for the betterment of humanity. Throughout his life, he demonstrated a belief that technology should not be created for its own sake, but to solve real-world problems and improve the human experience. This philosophy guided his work, from his efforts to help the deaf communicate to his development of tools that would improve communication for all people. Bell saw himself not just as an inventor, but as a servant of humanity, using his intellect and creativity to address the challenges faced by society. Bell's humility also played a role in how he was remembered. Though he was one of the most important figures of his time, he was not one to seek the spotlight or boast about his accomplishments. His focus was always on the work itself, and he often downplayed his role in the successes of his inventions, attributing much of his success to the contributions of others. This sense of humility, combined with his groundbreaking achievements, created a reputation that was both admired and respected, even as his personal and professional legacy continued to be debated and re-evaluated over time. As we reflect on Alexander Graham Bell's life and legacy, it is clear that his contributions extend far beyond the invention of the telephone. His work in multiple scientific fields, his advocacy for the deaf, and his commitment to improving communication for all people have left an indelible mark on history. Bell's impact is still felt in our world today, as the technologies he helped pioneer continue to shape the way we live, work, and communicate. Bell's final reflections on his own legacy may have been humble, but the world has not forgotten the extraordinary life he led. His work remains a testament to the power of human ingenuity, the pursuit of knowledge, and the desire to make the world a better place. As we continue to navigate the increasingly interconnected world that Bell envisioned, his influence will continue to be felt for generations to come. The death of Alexander Graham Bell in 1922 marked the closing of an era, but also the beginning of an enduring legacy that would echo through history. While Bell had lived a life filled with accolades, discoveries, and innovations, it was only after his passing that the true magnitude of his contributions was fully realized. Though he had never sought fame or recognition for his work, his impact on the world was undeniable, and after his death, recognition poured in from all corners of the globe as the scope of his inventions and achievements became clear. Bell's funeral, attended by family, friends, and colleagues, was a somber occasion, but it was also a moment for reflection on the profound mark he had left on the world. His death was felt deeply by the scientific community, especially those in the fields of telecommunications, education, and science, who recognized the immeasurable ways in which his work had transformed the world. But Bell's legacy stretched far beyond these fields. It had reached into the lives of ordinary people through the very technology he had invented. The telephone, Bell's most famous invention, was already a fixture of daily life by the time of his death, used by businesses, governments, and families across the globe. It had connected people in ways that were once unimaginable, breaking down barriers of distance and enabling faster, more efficient communication. Bell's telephone network had grown exponentially, and his vision of a more interconnected world was becoming a reality. The telephone had revolutionized commerce, politics, and personal relationships, and it would continue to evolve in the years that followed. Yet Bell's contributions did not end with the telephone. His pioneering work in acoustics, aviation, and hydrofoils, while often overshadowed by the success of his most famous invention, continued to influence technological advancement. His interest in flight in particular helped lay the groundwork for the modern era of aviation. Though Bell's attempts at powered flight were not successful in his lifetime, his research into aerodynamics and the principles of flight played a vital role in the progress of aviation, culminating in the successful flights of pioneers such as the Wright brothers. Beyond his technical innovations, Bell's deep commitment to the education of the deaf was another aspect of his life that continued to receive recognition after his death. His work with the deaf, particularly his emphasis on oralism, teaching the deaf to speak rather than use sign language, had sparked controversy during his lifetime. Despite the contentious nature of his methods, Bell's efforts to improve the lives of the hearing impaired were undeniably important, and his contributions to the field of deaf education were honoured posthumously. His desire to create a more inclusive world for the deaf, and his dedication to developing ways for them to communicate, shaped the course of deaf education and left a lasting impact on how the deaf community would be perceived in the years to come. After Bell's death, recognition of his achievements came from numerous organizations, many of which had played a role in the development of technologies that had stemmed from his work. The American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, which had grown out of Bell's original telephone company, became one of the most powerful and influential telecommunications companies in the world, continuing to build upon the foundation Bell had laid. The company's success was a tribute to Bell's vision and his drive to bring the world closer together through communication. In the years following his death, various honours were bestowed upon Bell to commemorate his achievements. Monuments were erected in his name, and schools, research centres and scientific institutions were dedicated to preserving his legacy. In 1925, just a few years after his passing, the Canadian government recognised his immense contributions to the field of communication by creating the Bell Telephone Laboratories in Montreal, further solidifying his place in the history of innovation. In addition to these institutional recognitions, Bell's name became synonymous with invention and progress. In the popular imagination, he was remembered not just as the inventor of the telephone, but as a symbol of scientific curiosity and determination. Even though Bell had always downplayed his role as an individual inventor, and had often attributed his success to the work of others, the world embraced him as one of the most important figures in the history of technology. His legacy, as the father of the telephone, had been cemented. While Bell's death marked the loss of one of the greatest minds of the 19th and 20th centuries, his contributions to science and technology continued to shape the world. The telephone became an integral part of modern life, and the principles of communication he pioneered still drive innovation today. The vast network of telecommunications that has since emerged, the mobile phone, the internet, video calls, are all part of Bell's vision of connecting people, making the world smaller and more accessible. Though Bell's later years had been marked by a gradual withdrawal from public life, his scientific curiosity and passion for invention never fully diminished. He remained involved in scientific circles and continued to experiment with new ideas, particularly in the fields of hydrofoils and aviation, even as his health began to decline. His constant drive to improve the world and his refusal to rest on his laurels were key aspects of his character, and they continue to inspire the innovators of today. In the decades following his death, Bell's legacy grew even stronger. The telephone network expanded to connect the entire globe, and the telecommunications revolution he started continued into the digital age. Technologies that Bell could not have foreseen, such as the internet and mobile phones, were based on the foundations he had laid. The world today is more connected than ever before, and Bell's vision of a world united by communication has become a reality. Though his life ended nearly a century ago, the world Bell envisioned is alive and thriving, and his name remains synonymous with progress, connectivity, and innovation. As Alexander Graham Bell's health declined in his later years, he took time to reflect on his extraordinary life and the world he'd helped shape. Having spent much of his life consumed by the pursuit of scientific discovery, Bell found himself turning inward in his final years, pondering the lasting impact of his inventions and the legacy he would leave behind. Though he had achieved more than most could ever dream, Bell remained humble, often attributing his success to the contributions of others. Yet, as he neared the end of his life, Bell recognized that his work had altered the course of human history in ways that were both far-reaching and profound. Looking back on his career, Bell would have likely found himself struck by the sheer breadth of his accomplishments. From his early interest in sound and speech to his invention of the telephone, Bell had been driven by a singular goal: to bridge the gap between people, to create a world where distance no longer hindered communication. The invention of the telephone in particular had fulfilled that vision. What had begun as a personal quest to help the deaf communicate had blossomed into one of the most transformative inventions in the history of humankind. However, Bell's reflections were not solely focused on the telephone. His work in other areas of science, including his experiments with flight and his development of the hydrofoil, had also left a lasting imprint on the world. Though his contributions in these fields were less well known, they were no less significant. Bell's work in aviation, for example, helped to lay the groundwork for future advances in flight. His efforts with the hydrofoil were also pioneering, pushing the limits of boat design and speed. Though these inventions did not achieve the same widespread success as the telephone, they demonstrated Bell's unwavering commitment to innovation and his desire to solve real-world problems. In his final years, Bell's thoughts often turned to his family, especially his wife, Mabel. Their life together had been marked by a shared commitment to improving the lives of the deaf, and Mabel had been Bell's closest collaborator and most steadfast supporter. Her deafness had profoundly influenced Bell's work, and the couple's partnership was integral to Bell's many accomplishments. As his health began to decline, Bell could take comfort in the knowledge that he had shared his life's work with someone who had understood his mission and had supported him throughout. Despite his personal struggles with illness, Bell's intellectual curiosity never waned. He continued to pursue his passions, experimenting with new ideas and remaining engaged in the scientific community. His commitment to progress remained strong, and he was deeply interested in how the world would continue to evolve in the years after his passing. The telephone, though firmly established as one of the most important inventions of the 19th century, was just one example of how science could change lives. Bell was keenly aware of the ripple effects his work had created, knowing that his inventions had set the stage for further advancements that would shape the future. Bell's final reflections on his legacy were likely shaped by his deep belief in the power of communication to foster understanding and connection. The telephone, after all, was not just a device. It was a tool that brought people closer together, transcending the barriers of distance and time. This ability to connect people across vast distances was, to Bell, a powerful symbol of human progress. His invention had connected people, businesses, and governments, and it had laid the foundation for the global communication networks that now define modern life. Bell could look back with satisfaction, knowing that his work had changed the way the world communicated forever. In his last years, Bell also reflected on the broader purpose of his life's work. Though he'd been successful beyond measure, he never sought personal glory or recognition. For Bell, the joy of invention came not from the fame or wealth it might bring, but from the knowledge that his work had made a positive difference in the lives of others. This sense of purpose, of contributing to the greater good, was what drove him throughout his life, and it was this that Bell cherished most as he approached the end of his journey. As Bell's health deteriorated, he likely found solace in the knowledge that his work would continue to have an impact long after he was gone. The telephone had already revolutionized the world, and the technologies that followed it, from mobile phones to the internet, were built on the foundation he had created. The legacy of the telephone in all its modern forms would carry Bell's vision forward into the future, connecting people in ways he had never imagined. Despite the challenges he faced in his later years, Bell remained deeply proud of his contributions to science and technology. The world he had helped create, one that was more interconnected and more accessible, was a testament to his dedication and his belief in the potential of human ingenuity. Even as his health declined, Bell remained focused on the future, knowing that the world would continue to evolve and that his work would live on in the innovations that followed. Bell's reflections on his life, particularly in his final years, would likely have been a mixture of satisfaction, humility, and wonder. He had achieved more than he had ever hoped for, and yet he remained driven by the belief that there was always more to discover. His work with the deaf, his contributions to aviation, his experiments with hydrofoils, and of course his invention of the telephone. Each of these accomplishments had been a piece of a larger vision, a vision of a world connected by communication, by shared knowledge, and by the power of human ingenuity. Bell's final thoughts would have been a quiet acknowledgement that through his work he had helped shape that world, and that his contributions would endure for generations to come. The world Alexander Graham Bell helped create is one where communication knows no bounds. The invention of the telephone, which Bell introduced in 1876, was not merely a technological breakthrough, it was a cultural revolution. By enabling people to speak with one another across vast distances, the telephone transformed every facet of human interaction, personal, professional, and political. Over time, Bell's creation became a symbol of a more connected world, and his influence extended far beyond his initial invention. Today, Bell's legacy lives on in the digital communications that define modern life. From the mobile phone in your pocket to the global internet infrastructure that connects billions of people around the world. While Bell's death in 1922 marked the end of his direct involvement in the development of telecommunications, his impact continued to grow. In the decades following his death, the telephone evolved from a simple voice transmission system into an essential tool for everyday life. The basic principles Bell established, converting sound into electrical signals and transmitting it over a wire, formed the foundation for everything that followed. The advent of mobile phones in the late 20th century, for example, was a direct extension of the technology Bell had created. As the technology evolved, so too did its ability to connect people across time and space, allowing for instantaneous communication anywhere in the world. Bell's invention of the telephone was not just an isolated achievement, it served as the catalyst for an entire industry. The Bell Telephone Company, which he founded, would later become the Bell System, and eventually evolve into what we know today as AT&T. Over time, this company helped build the infrastructure necessary for global telecommunication, with the construction of long-distance telephone lines, the first intercontinental communication systems, and the eventual development of satellite communications. Bell's vision of a connected world began to take shape on a global scale. The telephone network, initially a product of Bell's imagination, expanded exponentially in the 20th century, eventually reaching even the most remote corners of the globe. Bell's work made it possible for families to stay connected despite geographic distance, for businesses to communicate with clients and partners worldwide, and for politicians and governments to coordinate and negotiate on the international stage. The development of the telephone, as well as subsequent innovations in the telecommunications field, laid the groundwork for the global economy that exists today. The digital era, however, marked a new chapter in Bell's legacy. With the rise of the internet, mobile phones, and other forms of digital communication, Bell's invention of the telephone became part of an even larger technological revolution. The internet, which enables people to send messages, share information, and even speak to one another in real time across the globe, would not have been possible without Bell's original work. Today, technologies such as voice over IP, VoIP, and video conferencing have taken the basic concept of voice transmission and adapted it to a world that increasingly relies on the internet as its primary method of communication. The web itself is a product of the interconnected networks that Bell helped create, and mobile devices allow us to carry those networks with us wherever we go. The telephone, as Bell first envisioned it, is now part of a complex digital ecosystem that defines the modern world. Whether through smartphones, social media platforms, or real-time messaging apps, Bell's invention continues to serve as the backbone for global communication. Today's internet-connected world is the direct descendant of the telephone network Bell first built, and its far-reaching influence can be seen in every aspect of life, from business and education to socializing and entertainment. The ability to communicate instantly and globally, which was once thought impossible, is now commonplace, and Bell's invention was the initial spark that made this possible. Bell's legacy extends beyond the technological advancements that stemmed from his work. His fundamental ideas about communication, accessibility, and connection have shaped the way we view technology. Bell believed that communication should be accessible to all, and this belief drove much of his work. His invention of the telephone, while initially aimed at helping the deaf community, became a tool that allowed people from all walks of life to communicate with one another. This vision of inclusivity and connectivity remains a driving force behind the technologies we use today. The concept of global connectivity has grown far beyond what Bell could have imagined in his time. The telephone network he created was just the beginning. Today, the internet connects billions of people from the most developed cities to the most remote villages, creating a global network of communication that transcends geographic, economic, and cultural boundaries. Bell's work provided the foundation for the development of this global network, and his contributions to telecommunications laid the groundwork for the interconnected world we live in today. Bell's work also has lasting implications for how we think about communication in the modern era. The telephone, as a symbol of human connection, has evolved into the centerpiece of a new communication paradigm. We no longer rely solely on voice communication. Instead, we send texts, emails, images, and videos at the click of a button. Social media platforms, video calls, and instant messaging allow us to communicate in ways that were once unimaginable. These advancements are the natural extension of Bell's original invention, and his ideas continue to influence the way we interact with technology. While Bell may not have foreseen the explosion of digital communication technologies in the 21st century, his influence remains at the core of all modern communication. The concept of connecting people, of removing the barriers that once kept us apart, is as central today as it was in Bell's time. Mobile phones, the internet, and digital media continue to break down the distance between people, creating a global village that is more interconnected than ever before. Bell's legacy is also evident in the way we think about innovation itself. His commitment to solving real-world problems through technology set the stage for the generations of inventors and scientists who would follow him. Today, innovation in fields like artificial intelligence, robotics, and biotechnology builds on the same spirit of problem-solving that Bell embodied throughout his life. His work is a reminder of the power of human ingenuity to address challenges and create solutions that can change the world. As we reflect on the life and work of Alexander Graham Bell, it becomes clear that his ultimate legacy is far more than the telephone he invented. Bell was not merely an inventor. He was a visionary who sought to improve the world through technology and communication. His work transcended the boundaries of invention, deeply influencing not only the scientific and technological fields, but also the way humanity communicates and interacts with one another. Bell's achievements, both in the telephone and beyond, have shaped the world in ways that continue to resonate today, and his legacy remains deeply embedded in the fabric of modern life. The telephone itself is the most immediate and lasting reminder of Bell's genius. It revolutionized communication, breaking down the barriers of distance and time that had once separated individuals, families, businesses, and nations. What began as a solution to help the deaf communicate, Bell's personal motivation, evolved into a tool that would change the way people lived, worked, and connected across the world. The telephone, in its various forms from the original landline to the mobile phones of today, continues to be a central aspect of daily life, linking individuals and communities in ways that Bell could have scarcely imagined. But Bell's legacy is not solely tied to the telephone. His work in aviation, hydrofoils, and optical communication laid the foundation for other technologies that would emerge in the 20th century and beyond. Though Bell's contributions in these fields did not gain as much fame as his work on the telephone, they were no less important. His early work on flight and the aerodrome, for example, helped to propel the study of aerodynamics, inspiring future aviation pioneers like the Wright brothers. His hydrofoil designs provided critical insights into faster and more efficient maritime travel, and his experiments with optical communication foreshadowed the development of fiber optics and digital telecommunications in the modern world. Bell's work in these various scientific fields demonstrated a deep commitment to solving real-world problems through innovation. Whether he was developing a faster boat, exploring the possibilities of flight, or striving to create a better way for the deaf to communicate, Bell was always focused on improving the human condition. His work was driven by the belief that technology should serve humanity, That invention was not simply for the sake of discovery, but for the purpose of creating a better, more connected world. It was this principle that guided him through every challenge he faced and every invention he created. One of the most remarkable aspects of Bell's life is his enduring commitment to the education of the deaf. His work with the deaf community was deeply personal, shaped by his own experiences with his mother's deafness and his wife Mabel's hearing loss. His dedication to improving communication for the deaf was evident in his creation of the telephone, but it also manifested in his work as an educator and advocate for the deaf. Bell firmly believed that the deaf should be able to communicate with the wider world, and he was deeply involved in the development of oralism, a method of teaching speech to the deaf. Though his methods, particularly his emphasis on oralism over sign language, sparked significant controversy, Bell's commitment to the deaf community remains one of the most important aspects of his legacy. He sought to provide the deaf with the tools to communicate more effectively, opening doors for them in a society that often marginalized their voices. His work in this field laid the groundwork for future advancements in deaf education, and his advocacy for the deaf continues to be remembered as a key part of his life's work. Beyond his technical achievements and contributions to the deaf community, Bell's ultimate legacy lies in his unwavering curiosity and dedication to the advancement of knowledge. He was never content to rest on his laurels or simply bask in the success of the telephone. Even in his later years, when his health began to decline, Bell remained deeply engaged in the pursuit of new knowledge. His experiments with hydrofoils, his exploration of aeronautics, and his continued work in optical communication are all evidence of his relentless drive to push the boundaries of science and technology. Bell's life was a testament to the power of curiosity and the importance of continually seeking new solutions to the problems of the world. Bell's legacy is also defined by the way he connected people, physically, emotionally, and intellectually. His work with the telephone was, at its core, about breaking down barriers and bringing people closer together. The world that Bell envisioned, one where communication could bridge vast distances, has become a reality. Today, technology continues to evolve, but the fundamental principle that Bell introduced, the idea that communication should be accessible, instantaneous, and global, remains central to modern life. His contributions paved the way for the technologies we now take for granted, from mobile phones and video conferencing to the internet itself. Perhaps Bell's most enduring legacy is the way his work has connected humanity in ways that were once inconceivable. The telephone, the internet, and the various forms of digital communication that have followed have transformed the way people live and interact. Bell's work not only made the world smaller, but it made it more interconnected and accessible. His invention of the telephone laid the foundation for a future in which communication is no longer bound by time or space, allowing people to communicate across the globe at the touch of a button. In the end, Alexander Graham Bell's legacy is not defined by a single invention or achievement, but by the vision and commitment that guided him throughout his life. His work revolutionized communication, but it also touched every corner of human society, from education and science to commerce and politics. Bell was a man driven by a desire to make the world a better place, and his inventions continue to serve that purpose to this day. Bell's legacy endures because of his belief that technology could connect people and improve their lives. His dedication to communication, both through the telephone and his other scientific endeavors, has shaped the way we live and interact with one another. The world is more connected today than ever before, and the foundation for this interconnectedness was laid by Bell's visionary work. As we close the story of Alexander Graham Bell, we are left with a profound understanding of the enduring impact he has had on the world. From his work with the deaf to his revolutionary invention of the telephone, Bell's contributions have shaped the way we communicate, learn, and connect. His vision of a world united through communication was realized in ways he could have scarcely imagined, and his work continues to resonate in the technologies we use today. Bell's legacy is not just in the inventions he created, but in the way he approached problems with curiosity, humility, and a desire to improve the human condition. His work in various fields, from telecommunications to aviation, hydrofoils, and optical communication, laid the groundwork for future advancements that have forever transformed our world. His commitment to the education of the deaf, his advocacy for accessibility, and his belief in the power of science to drive progress all form the core of a legacy that endures to this day. In reflecting on Bell's life, we can see how one man's determination to connect people across distances helped create a world that is more interconnected, accessible, and united. Alexander Graham Bell's influence lives on, not just through the telephone, but in the very fabric of the modern world.